So we mentioned briefly that some of the words we use from the scientific jargon can be confusing for lay people, like positive feedback in our business is an amplifying of perturbation, whereas for general public it may be a pat on the back from somebody because you did a good job, and so on. So we'll look at a table of some common words that have different meanings for scientists versus general public. The other thing is about how scientists organize the information in our publications versus how a newspaper reporter or a journalist would arrange the information. Okay, a scientific publication starts with an abstract which highlights the results, then immediately launches into what is called introduction or background, where we say why this story is built on the previous work and what is it that the previous studies didn't complete, and then what are the supporting details like the data used, the model, the approach, the analysis, whatever. Finally, we come to results and conclusions. Okay, this makes it sound like we just started peacefully collecting information and decided this needs to be done, and then we did it and then found the results. It kind of misses the whole journey of how sometimes we serendipitously arrive at something, or we start by knowing something that was incomplete and we want to answer something that was missing, and there is lots of random paths you have to go, blind spots you run into, and so on. So the advice is to use what the journalists would do. They start by saying quickly what the bottom line of the story is. So you quickly grasp what the story is and whether you should want to read further or not. So then they tell you, so what? What if this was found? Let's say somebody announced that Obamacare must be abolished, and then you say what the consequences are and what are the supporting details, and so on and so forth. It's just an example, but I think you know what I mean. So here is a sample of words from the book that are not scientific jargon, but they are used differently by scientists and the public. So scientific term is enhance, public might think it's improve, so better choice would be intensify and increase. Aerosol, spray can, positive trend can mean a good trend, whereas in our business, positive trend of warming or worse water quality or sea level rise is actually bad news. But you could say upward trend, maybe it works better. Positive feedback I mentioned. Theory can mean hunch or speculation, whereas in our business that's something that has tested the hypothesis and made the transition to the theory. Okay. Uncertainty can mean ignorance. Error can mean a mistake. Bias can mean a distortion or political motive, whereas when we say a model has a bias, we mean that it's systematically different from observations and we need to figure out why, whereas general public may think we are somehow biased against something. There is a political motivation, racial bias, for example. Okay, sign is an indication, astrological sign. Values, manipulation, scheme. Okay, we commonly use parameterization scheme in our language, which means it's a way of representing a process that is not explicitly captured by the physics, but for people it may mean a devious plot. Really bad idea, right? So systematic plan may work better in that case. Anomaly, we commonly say temperature anomaly, snowfall anomaly, rainfall anomaly, and so on and so forth, but that may mean abnormal occurrence for public, where we might say change from long-term average. So when I talked about global warming from industrial revolution, I said change from the baseline. Okay, so you have to be careful about those words that we think are obvious, but maybe that's not obvious. So this is called burying the lead. So let me come to this in the next podcast, because I think this has an interesting point to be made. So if you get trained by journalists, which is a good idea, especially if you're trying to communicate or write for the general public. I write, for example, pretty regularly about translating my own research or the research of others that I find very interesting into articles for the general public. And fortunately, I often get input from editors who say this is not clear, you need to explain better. So there is a gate through which I have to go. But I also have a blog site where I just post whatever I write with no gates. Nobody is checking whether that makes sense or not. So in that case, I have to have a very clear idea of who my audience is. Who am I trying to talk to? Is it to my colleagues or is it really to the general public? Okay, so the audience, target audience matters. We must be very aware of the words we use to make sure that they are either not misunderstood or misconstrued or used for the wrong purpose. Right? So message and messenger can be easily used by vested interest to separate each other and then make the message get lost. Okay, so in that post-expert digital age, the blog is sitting somewhere, somebody is reading it, they can quote from it, and things can happen. So some of the articles I wrote on how the analogy of the cheese and the rat can be used for how action comes about. It was taken out of context and some silly article was written, so I had to write a rebuttal article to say what I mean. But you don't always get a chance to rebut, because once the message gets trapped in some echo chamber somewhere, it can get lost. Okay, like the Al Gore syndrome that we talked about. So we have to be very careful.